A courtroom echoes with the mocking laughter of a wealthy husband who thinks he's leaving his stay-at-home wife with nothing, but his smug grin is about to vanish. Watch what happens when a seemingly helpless woman drops a billion-dollar bombshell that turns a devastating divorce into a masterclass in revenge. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 302 in downtown Manhattan remained closed to the public, but the tension inside was thick enough to suffocate a man. It was a brisk Tuesday morning in November, and the high-stakes divorce proceedings of Cole versus Cole were underway. The air smelled of expensive leather, floor wax, and the palpable, suffocating arrogance radiating from the petitioner's table. Harrison Cole, 42 years old and dressed in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit, sat back in his chair with his legs crossed. He looked less like a man going through the dissolution of a 15-year marriage and more like a CEO waiting for an underling to finish a boring PowerPoint presentation. He idly checked his platinum Rolex, a faint, almost pitying smile playing on his lips. Beside him sat his high-powered attorney, Benjamin Caldwell, a shark of a man who billed thousands of dollars an hour to ensure that wealthy men kept every single penny they believed was rightfully theirs. Across the aisle sat Caroline Cole. She was 41, dressed modestly in a simple navy blazer and a beige silk blouse. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat, unassuming bun. For 15 years, she had been the quiet, supportive shadow to Harrison's booming, aggressive sunlight. While Harrison built Cole Dynamics into one of the most ruthless and successful commercial real estate development firms on the East Coast, Carolyn had stayed home. She managed their sprawling Connecticut estate, hosted his tedious corporate dinners, and supposedly spent her free time dabbling in what Harrison affectionately and condescendingly called her little computer hobbies. Harrison had filed for divorce 6 months prior. The reason was as cliched as it was devastating. Chloe Danvers. Chloe was a 26-year-old interior designer whom Harrison had hired to remodel the lobby of his latest skyscraper. Within weeks, she was remodeling his life. Harrison hadn't just cheated, he had paraded Chloe around, moving her into a luxury penthouse while simultaneously serving Carolyn with divorce papers. He had expected Carolyn to weep, to beg, or perhaps to throw a hysterical fit. Instead, she had simply packed a single suitcase, moved into a modest apartment in Brooklyn, and hired a lawyer. Now, they were in court to finalize the division of assets, and Harrison was thoroughly enjoying the show. "Your Honor," Benjamin Caldwell began, his voice booming across the quiet courtroom as he addressed Judge Thomas Mercer. "The matter before us is incredibly straightforward. My client and the respondent entered into a prenuptial agreement 15 years ago. At the time, Mr. Cole was just beginning his career in real estate. The agreement clearly states that, in the event of a dissolution of marriage, all business assets, intellectual property, and real estate holdings acquired by either party independently shall remain the sole and separate property of that individual." Caldwell paused, letting the words hang in the air, ensuring the judge understood the implication. Furthermore, the agreement stipulates that spousal support will be capped at $5,000 a month for a period of exactly 3 years. My client is more than willing to honor this commitment, despite the fact that Mrs. Cole is perfectly capable of entering the workforce. Judge Mercer, a stern man with white hair and peering spectacles, looked down at the documents before him. $5,000 a month, in Manhattan? And Mrs. Cole has not been employed in a traditional sense for 15 years? "That is correct, Your Honor," Caldwell said smoothly. "Mrs. Cole has chosen to spend her time engaged in personal leisure pursuits. She paints, she blogs, she does amateur coding. My client has fully supported her lifestyle for a decade and a half, but he should not be financially penalized because she chose not to build a career. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. What is his is his. What is hers is hers. At this, Harrison couldn't help himself. A sharp, mocking laugh escaped his lips. It echoed loudly in the quiet room. He leaned over to Caldwell, whispering just loud enough for the opposing table to hear. What is hers? What's she going to take? Her knitting needles and her broken laptop? Caroline didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting calmly on the table. She didn't look at Harrison. She just kept her eyes fixed on the judge. Her attorney, Evelyn Ross, was a sharp contrast to the theatrical Benjamin Caldwell. Evelyn was a quiet, meticulous woman who wore wire-rimmed glasses and possessed a reputation for being dangerously thorough. She slowly stood up, adjusting her files. Is the respondent in agreement with the petitioner's assessment of the prenuptial agreement, Ms. Ross? Judge Mercer asked, looking over his glasses. It is a rather aggressive document, but if both parties signed it willingly— We are in complete agreement, Your Honor, Evelyn said. Her voice was clear, crisp, and remarkably calm. Harrison's smug smile widened. He had won. He was going to walk away with his $90 million real estate empire, his cars, his penthouse, and his new young fiancée, while his boring, invisible wife would be forced to clip coupons in a cramped apartment. He actually felt a brief, fleeting moment of pity for her. She really was entirely helpless without him. We agree that the prenuptial agreement is completely ironclad, Evelyn continued, stepping out from behind her table. In fact, we insist upon its strict enforcement. As Mr. Caldwell so eloquently stated, what is his, and what is hers, is hers. Benjamin Caldwell frowned slightly. There was something about Evelyn's tone that he didn't like. A trap door had just creaked open somewhere in the dark, but he couldn't quite see where it was. Very well, Judge Mercer said, picking up his pen. If there is no dispute regarding the validity of the prenup, we can move to the disclosure of assets. Mr. Cole, you have submitted your financial affidavits. You declare your net worth, encompassing Cole Dynamics and personal holdings, to be approximately $94 million. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Harrison said, sitting up straight, projecting the chest-out confidence of a self-made titan of industry. And Miss Ross, the judge turned to Caroline's lawyer, I have a file here for your client. I see a personal checking account with a balance of $42,000, a 2018 Volvo, and, well, that appears to be it. Harrison snorted loudly, covering his mouth with a perfectly manicured hand to hide his amusement. 42 grand. He spent that much on a weekend trip to Monaco with Chloe. Actually, Your Honor, Evelyn Ross said softly, we have an updated addendum to the financial disclosure. We filed it with the clerk exactly 10 minutes before these proceedings began. She handed a thick, bound folder to the bailiff, who carried it up to the judge. She then walked over and dropped a copy onto Benjamin Caldwell's table. It landed with a heavy, ominous thud. What is this? Caldwell snapped, leafing through the first few pages. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Ambushing us with documents at the final hearing? It is merely a complete and exhaustive list of Mrs. Cole's independent assets, as required by the court, Evelyn replied innocently. Since Mr. Cole was so adamant that the prenuptial agreement be strictly enforced to protect independent business ventures, my client wanted to ensure she was in full compliance. Harrison leaned over to look at the document. What business ventures? He hissed at his lawyer. She runs a gardening blog that gets 12 views a month. Judge Mercer opened the folder. He adjusted his glasses, He read the first page. Then he stopped. He took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, put his glasses back on, and read the page again. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall and the sudden, shallow breathing of Judge Mercer. "Ms. Ross," the judge said, his voice completely devoid of its former routine boredom. "Is this a typographical error?" "No, Your Honor. The figures are entirely accurate and verified by 3 independent forensic accounting firms, the affidavits for which are attached in Appendix B." Harrison's mocking smile began to falter. He looked at Caroline. For the first time in 15 years, Caroline turned her head and looked him dead in the eye. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes were cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear. "Your Honor, I object." Benjamin Caldwell stood up, his face flushing red. "I haven't even had time to review this fiction. My client has been married to this woman for 15 years. He knows her finances. She does not have any hidden assets. I would suggest you read the document before calling it fiction, Mr. Caldwell," Judge Mercer said, his eyes glued to the pages. He turned to Evelyn. "Counselor, for the sake of the court, please walk us through this, because what I am looking at completely changes the landscape of this divorce." Evelyn walked over to the courtroom projector and connected her tablet. A complex organizational chart appeared on the wall. "Certainly, Your Honor," Evelyn began, pacing slowly. "For the past 15 years, Mr. Cole has operated under the assumption that his wife was merely a homemaker who dabbled in computers. What he failed to realize, or perhaps failed to ask about, was exactly what she was doing on those computers." Harrison crossed his arms, scoffing loudly to project confidence he was rapidly losing. "She was buying digital clothes for her avatars. Your Honor, this is a stall tactic." "Please keep your client quiet, Mr. Caldwell," the judge warned sharply. "Go on, Ms. Ross." "In 2011, Evelyn continued, highlighting a small box at the bottom of the chart on the screen. Mrs. Cole began writing code. She didn't have a formal degree, but she possessed a brilliant, self-taught mathematical mind. She developed a proprietary algorithm designed to optimize high-frequency cryptocurrency trading and secure blockchain logistics. Harrison rolled his eyes. "Crypto. Great. She has some magic internet money." "At first it was a small venture," Evelyn said, ignoring him. "But her algorithm was revolutionary. By 2014, while Mr. Cole was busy taking out high-interest loans to fund his first commercial strip mall, Mrs. Cole had quietly licensed her algorithm to 3 major international fintech firms. She formed an LLC called Nexus Core. "Nexus Core?" Harrison whispered, his brow furrowing. The name sounded incredibly familiar. He had read about them in the Wall Street Journal. They were a notoriously secretive tech conglomerate. "Under the strict terms of the prenuptial agreement drafted by Mr. Cole," Evelyn reminded the room, pointing directly at Harrison, "any intellectual property created by either spouse is solely theirs. Any business founded by either spouse is solely theirs." "Get to the numbers, Evelyn," Caldwell demanded, sweating slightly. "Nexus Core generated roughly $40 million in licensing fees in its first 3 years," Evelyn stated plainly. Harrison gripped the edge of the mahogany table. $40 million? While he was struggling to make payroll in 2014, his wife, sitting in her sweatpants in their home office, was pulling in $40 million. He felt dizzy, but Evelyn was just warming up. "Instead of spending this money, Mrs. Cole reinvested it," Evelyn continued, clicking her clicker. The chart on the screen expanded, showing Nexus Core branching out into 6 other entities. She foresaw the boom in artificial intelligence and decentralized finance. She became an anonymous angel investor. She funded a startup called Aura Tech in 2016 for $2 million. Aura Tech went public last year. Her 15% stake is currently valued at $320 million. "Objection!" Caldwell shouted, his composure shattering. "This is preposterous. If she had $300 million, we would know. There are tax returns, joint filings." "We filed separately since 2013, Mr. Caldwell, at Mr. Cole's explicit insistence," Evelyn countered with a razor-sharp smile. Mr. Cole didn't want Mrs. Cole's hobby expenses dragging down his corporate tax profile. He signed a waiver relinquishing any right to review her separate filings. "We have the signed document right here." Harrison felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered that document. He had shoved it in front of Carolyn while he was rushing out the door to a golf tournament, telling her it was just paperwork to keep her knitting club expenses out of his real estate audits. He had literally locked himself out of his wife's financial life out of pure arrogance. "Your Honor, if I may continue," Evelyn said, commanding the room. "The Aura Tech shares are just the equity portfolio. Mrs. Cole also diversified into hard assets, operating through a blind trust known as the Obsidian Group." At the mention of Obsidian Group, Harrison stood up, knocking his heavy leather chair backward with a loud crash. His face was stark white. "Sit down, Mr. Cole," Judge Mercer barked. Harrison didn't sit. He stared at Caroline, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "You," he stammered. "Obsidian? You are Obsidian?" Caldwell grabbed his client's arm. "Harrison, what is it? What's Obsidian?" Harrison ignored his lawyer. His mind was flashing back to 3 months ago. He had been trying to acquire a massive, highly lucrative block of commercial real estate in downtown Chicago. It was supposed to be his crown jewel, the project that elevated Cole Dynamics to a national level. He had leveraged everything: his current properties, his personal penthouse, even a line of credit against his company, to make an aggressive $80 million bid. At the 11th hour, a faceless private equity firm called the Obsidian Group had swooped in, paid $110 million in cash, and snatched the properties right out from under him. The loss had crippled Cole Dynamics. Harrison was currently secretly dodging calls from his creditors, hoping to finalize the divorce and use his new freedom to secure fresh loans. "Yes, Mr. Cole," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with the kind of polite venom that only years of preparation could muster. "Mrs. Cole is the sole managing director and 100% shareholder of the Obsidian Group. It seems she has quite the eye for commercial real estate. You bought it just to ruin me," Harrison yelled, pointing a trembling finger at his wife. "You overpaid by $30 million just to screw me out of the Chicago deal." Caroline finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the courtroom, it carried like a gunshot. "I didn't overpay, Harrison," she said smoothly. "I simply had the cash, and I knew you didn't. It was a solid investment, nothing personal, just business." She had used his own favorite catchphrase against him. Just business. Whenever he had skipped their anniversary, whenever he had fired a loyal employee, whenever he had brazenly defended his affair with Chloe, "It's just business, Carolyn. You wouldn't understand." Caldwell was frantically flipping through the massive financial disclosure binder, his eyes wide with panic. "Your Honor, the total assets listed here. This can't be right." "Read the bottom line, Mr. Caldwell," Judge Mercer instructed, leaning back in his chair, seemingly captivated by the sheer audacity of the reveal. Caldwell swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet room. He looked at Harrison, then back to the page. The respondents disclosed net worth across all liquid assets, equities, and real estate holdings is roughly $1.4 billion. A collective gasp echoed from the court reporter and the bailiff. Harrison's knees finally gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, staring blankly at the wall. $1 billion. His quiet, invisible, boring wife wasn't just wealthy. She was a titan. She was a whale. While he was playing aggressively with millions, begging banks for loans, and sleeping with his interior designer to feel powerful, Caroline had been quietly conquering the financial world in her pajamas. And because of the very prenuptial agreement Harrison had gleefully weaponized to leave her with nothing, he wasn't entitled to a single dime of it. "So," Evelyn Ross said brightly, breaking the stunned silence, "now that we have established that my client is a self-made billionaire, and per the prenuptial agreement, her assets are completely insulated from Mr. Cole, we have one final matter to discuss." Harrison looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "What else could there possibly be?" he croaked. Evelyn turned to the judge, a predatory gleam in her eye. "We need to discuss Mr. Cole's debts, and how my client owns them." The air in courtroom 302 had grown heavy, thick with the scent of impending ruin. Harrison Cole, the man who had strutted into the room like a conqueror just an hour ago, was now slumped in his heavy leather chair, his bespoke Brioni suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too large. The revelation of his wife's billion-dollar empire had effectively paralyzed him. But Evelyn Ross was not finished. She stood at the podium, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses with the meticulous precision of a surgeon, preparing for the final, fatal incision. "Your Honor," Evelyn began, her voice a cool, steady hum that cut through the silence. "As we have established, the prenuptial agreement dictates a strict separation of assets. What is hers is hers. However, it also dictates a strict separation of liabilities. What is his is his." Benjamin Caldwell, Harrison's high-priced attorney, ran a trembling hand over his face. "Your Honor, I must protest. My client's financial liabilities have already been submitted and reviewed. Cole Dynamics is currently navigating a brief liquidity crisis due to the aggressive market conditions in Chicago, but the company's debts are managed." "Are they, Mr. Caldwell?" Evelyn asked, turning to face him. She produced a single, crisp manila folder from her briefcase. "Because according to the public filings from last Thursday, Cole Dynamics defaulted on a key financial covenant attached to its primary line of credit, a mezzanine loan totaling $45 million issued by the Sterling Cooper Trust." Harrison's head snapped up. His eyes were wild, darting between his lawyer and his wife. The $45 million loan was the anchor around his neck. He had taken it out in secret, heavily leveraging his existing properties to fund the catastrophic Chicago bid. When the Obsidian Group, Caroline's blind trust, had outbid him, his projections had collapsed. He had missed the quarterly payment. "That is a private corporate matter," Harrison spat, his voice cracking with panic. "The bank has agreed to a grace period. They are restructuring the debt." "They were restructuring the debt," Evelyn corrected smoothly. "Until yesterday afternoon. Your Honor, I have here the transfer of deed and the assignment of debt." She handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them to Judge Mercer. "What does this mean?" Harrison demanded, grabbing Caldwell by the sleeve. "Ben, do your job. What is she doing?" Caldwell was already reading the copy Evelyn had slammed onto their table. His face, usually a mask of practiced indifference, drained of all color. He looked up at Harrison, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of pity and professional dread. "Harrison," Caldwell whispered, his voice barely audible. "Sterling Cooper sold the debt." "To who?" Harrison rasped. Evelyn walked back to her table and stood behind Caroline, placing a supportive hand on the billionaire's shoulder. "The debt was purchased at a 10% premium by Aegis Financial Partners, a private equity firm that specializes in distressed assets. Harrison's brain felt like it was moving through wet concrete. Aegis? I don't know who that is. I don't care. I'll negotiate with them. You won't have to look far to find the managing director, Evelyn replied, a razor-sharp smile playing on her lips. Aegis Financial Partners is a wholly owned subsidiary of Nexus Core, and as we established 20 minutes ago, Nexus Core is owned entirely by Mrs. Caroline Cole. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a man's entire reality shattering into a million irreparable pieces. She bought my debt, Harrison whispered, staring blankly at the polished mahogany table. He looked up at Judge Mercer, his eyes pleading. Your Honor, she bought my debt. That's illegal. It's a conflict of interest. She's my wife. Judge Mercer peered over his spectacles, looking down at the frantic man with undisguised contempt. Mr. Cole, need I remind you of the very prenuptial agreement you insisted we enforce today? You explicitly demanded that your wife's business entities be treated as completely separate and foreign entities to your own. Aegis Financial Partners is a legal corporation. They purchased a distressed loan on the open market. There is absolutely nothing illegal about it. But she's going to call the loan, Harrison shouted, standing up, his chest heaving. She's going to demand the $45 million. Caroline slowly leaned forward toward her microphone. For the second time that day, she spoke directly to the man who had humiliated her, cheated on her, and tried to leave her destitute. I already have, Harrison, she said quietly. The notice of acceleration was served to your corporate office 20 minutes ago. The loan is no longer in a grace period. It is due in full. Immediately. I don't have $45 million in liquid cash, Harrison's voice echoed in the cavernous courtroom, bordering on a hysterical scream. You know I don't have it. You took the Chicago deal from me. You bled me dry. I didn't bleed you dry, Caroline replied, her tone as placid as a still lake. You spent millions on a luxury penthouse for your mistress. You bought a fleet of imported sports cars to soothe your midlife crisis. You leveraged your own company into the ground because your ego wouldn't allow you to grow it sustainably. I didn't ruin you, Harrison. I just bought a front row seat to watch you ruin yourself. Your Honor, Caldwell pleaded, desperately trying to salvage whatever was left of his client's life. We ask for an emergency injunction. If Aegis calls this loan, Cole Dynamics will be forced into immediate bankruptcy. The collateral on that loan includes my client's personal assets, his bank accounts, his primary residence. His primary residence, Evelyn interjected sharply, is the Tribeca penthouse where he currently resides with 26-year-old Chloe Danvers. And yes, Your Honor, as the primary creditor of a defaulted, fully collateralized loan, Aegis Financial intends to seize all attached assets by the end of the business week. Judge Mercer closed the file. He took off his glasses and folded them neatly on his desk. He looked at Harrison Cole, who was now gripping his own hair, completely unspooled. Mr. Caldwell, the judge said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Your client drafted an aggressive, punitive prenuptial agreement designed to protect his wealth and isolate his wife. He insisted on strict adherence to the letter of that contract. The court is merely granting his wish. The agreement is valid. The debt is valid. The foreclosure is valid. Harrison collapsed back into his chair, a hollow, broken shell of a man. Caroline, please, he begged, his voice trembling, all of his former arrogance entirely evaporated. Please. We were married for 15 years. I built that company from nothing. Don't take it. Don't take the penthouse. Where will I go? Caroline stood up. She buttoned her simple navy blazer, looking down at the man she had loved, supported, and ultimately outsmarted. "You can take the 2018 Volvo," Caroline said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "It's listed under my independent assets, but I'm feeling generous. Consider it a parting gift." "Oh, and Harrison?" He looked up at her, tears pooling in his bloodshot eyes. "Tell Chloe she has until Friday at noon to vacate my penthouse. After that, I'm changing the locks." Caroline didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, her heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. She didn't look back as Judge Mercer struck his wooden gavel against the sounding block. "Divorce granted," the judge declared. "Court is adjourned." The heavy oak doors swung open, and Caroline Cole, billionaire, mastermind, and newly single woman, stepped out into the bright, blinding sunlight of Manhattan, leaving the echoes of her ex-husband's ruin trapped in the shadows behind her. If you loved watching this arrogant husband get the ultimate dose of karma, hit that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping true-life drama. What would you have done if you were in Carolyn's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves a masterclass in revenge. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next incredible story.